Hello everyone, welcome to our video for today. Today we're going to be looking at chapter 4-3, Triangle Congruence. The objective for today is students will be able to use properties of congruent triangles and prove triangles are congruent by using the definition of congruence. Right, so geometric figures are congruent if they are the same size and shape. Corresponding angles and corresponding sides are in the same position in polygons with an equal number of sides. Two polygons, meaning any shape with a number of sides greater than 3, are congruent polygons if and only if their corresponding sides are congruent. Thus, triangles that are the same size and shape are congruent. So in this section, we're basically going to be focusing on triangles, on congruent triangles. So in the first part here, well, congruent triangles are triangles with the same size and same shape. Right, so as you can see here, I have two congruent triangles, and this means that all corresponding parts, the angles and the sides. So if all the angles of the two triangles and all the sides are equal to each other, are congruent, that means that these two triangles will be congruent to each other. So as you can see here, they're already telling me that angle A is congruent to angle D because they both have only one tick mark. They also tell me here that angle B, so with two arc marks, angle B is congruent to angle E right here because it has two arc marks. And the angle C, let me pick a different color here, angle C, which has three arc marks, is congruent to angle F. So I can see here that all my three angles are congruent to each other. And they also give you information on the sides. They tell you the first side here with one tick mark, side AB is congruent to side ED. The tick marks are letting you know here. This one has two tick marks. That means that side BC is congruent to, right here, side EF. And lastly here, side AC with three tick marks is congruent to side DF. And so since all the angles and all the sides are congruent to each other, that means that these two triangles are congruent. Now with that information, we can actually write something called a congruent statement. And the congruent statement for this two triangles would be saying is triangle ABC is congruent to triangle DEF. And this right here is called the congruent statement. And for this statement, the order is very, very, very important. All right, so a congruency statement is when triangles are congruent, we can write a congruency statement. So in this example here, we have two congruent triangles, and you can see here that this is letting us know that angle A is congruent to angle D, angle B is congruent to angle E, and angle C is congruent to angle F. Even the sides as well, they tell me that side AB is congruent to side ED, side BC is congruent to side FE, and side AC is congruent to side FD. So all the corresponding sides and all the corresponding angles for these two triangles are congruent to each other. And here is a congruency statement telling me that triangle ABC is congruent to triangle DEF. But again, as I mentioned before, the order is very, very, very important because even if we didn't have, let me go ahead and cover this. Even if we didn't have the figure here, let me fix that real quick. Let's say we didn't have the figure here. Without this information, we can actually get what angles and what sides are congruent to each other just simply by looking at the congruency statement. So as you can see here, the order is very important because the first part here for the congruent angles, the first angle, angle A, is congruent to the first letter here as well, angle D. So here you can already see here that angle A and angle D are going to be congruent in these two triangles. Next one, angle B, is going to be congruent to angle E. And lastly, my last angle here is angle C, and that angle is going to be congruent to angle F from the other triangle. So I can already see all my congruent angles based on the order of the congruency statement, and I can even know what my congruent sides are going to be. And as you can see here, my first side is going to be side AB. So segment AB is going to be congruent to the side in the other triangle, DE. Side DE, segment DE. Same thing here. The first one was AB, the second segment, the second side is going to be BC. And so that one's going to be congruent to the second and third letter over here, side EF. And lastly here, the last side is going to be the first letter and the last letter, side AC is going to be congruent to the first letter and the last letter, DF, side DF. So even along with the congruency statement alone, I can already see what my congruent angles are going to be and what my congruent sides are going to be. And as you can see here, if I were to move my what I use here to cover it, I can see that I'm correct because look, angle A is congruent to angle D. Angle B is congruent to angle E, and angle C is congruent to angle F. Same thing with my sides. Look, side AB, let me go ahead and color this. Side AB is congruent to side DE. And then side BC, this side over here, is congruent to side EF, right here. And last one, side AC, this side right here, is congruent to side DF. And that's how I can get all the information, all my congruent angles and all my congruent sides, simply by knowing my congruency statement. And again, the congruency statement, the order is very, very, very important. So let's go ahead and try some examples here. Let's go ahead and look at this first example, number 1. It says, given the congruency statement, list all the congruent angles and all the congruent sides. So they give me my congruency statement here that's saying triangle ABE is congruent to triangle MNP. I don't even know how my triangles look, but I already know that I have 2 congruent triangles where the corresponding angles and the corresponding sides are equal. So let's go ahead and list the angles first. So in the first angle that we're going to be looking at is the first letter here. Angle A is going to be congruent to what angle over here in the other triangle? Angle M. The second one here, the second angle is the second letter here. So angle B is going to be congruent to angle, and in this triangle here is going to be angle N. And same thing with the last one here, angle E is going to be congruent to angle P. So I already got the list of all my congruent angles on my triangle. Now I got a list of sides. So for the first side is the first 2 letters. Side AB is going to be congruent to the first 2 letters on the second one, MN. So that one's going to be congruent to side MN. The second side is going to be the second letter and the third letter, NP, side NP is going to be congruent to side, I'm sorry, not the NP, that one's for the first triangle. I mean here for, if we look at the first triangle here, I'm sorry, BE, side BE is going to be congruent to side, now in the second triangle, it's going to be side NP. And there you go. So those 2 sides are equal. And for the last side, we always look at the first letter and the last letter. Side AE is going to be congruent to side MP. And there you go. I listed all my congruent angles and all my congruent sides of the triangle. Now, if they were to ask you to actually draw them. So I'm going to go ahead and sketch out my 2 triangles. I'm going to assume they look something like this. I don't know how they look, but I just assume that they should look about exactly the same. And I'm going to go ahead and label this one A, B, E, and this one over here is going to be M and P. So there's my 2 triangles, but they're telling me that they're congruent. So in this case, if I were to go ahead and label my entire triangle, what are my congruent angles and are my congruent sides? Well, I know the first angle, angle A, is going to be congruent to angle M. So that's how we use it with one arc mark. Angle B with 2 arc marks is going to be congruent to angle N. And lastly, angle E with 3 arc marks is going to be congruent to angle P. So that's what I can say so far with my congruent angles. Now my congruent side. The first side here, side AB, I'm going to put 1 arc mark, is congruent to side MN. So I'm going to put 1 arc mark there. Second side here, BE, is going to be congruent to, so I'm going to use 2 tick marks. I'm sorry, BE is going to be congruent to side NP. So 2 tick marks. And the last side here, side AE, which is the third one here with 3 tick marks, is going to be congruent to side MP with 3 tick marks. And that's how I would label my 2 triangles if they would have asked me to sketch them out. And again, I can get all of this information just by simply knowing my congruency statement because the order is very, very important. Let's go ahead and try out a second example here. So they're telling me that they give me the congruency statement, triangle QRY is congruent to triangle JLS. And they want me to list all my congruent angles and all my congruent sides. So again, for the angles, you look at the first letter first. Angle Q is going to be congruent to angle J. Second one here, angle R is going to be congruent to angle L. And the third angle there, angle Y, is going to be congruent to angle S. So again, even though I don't know what those two triangles look like, I already know which angles are going to be congruent to which angles on the other triangle. And even my sides as well. My first side is going to be side QR. That was going to be congruent to side JL. The second side is RY. So side RY is going to be congruent to side LS. And lastly, it's the first letter and the last letter. Side QY is going to be congruent to side JS. And there are all my congruent angles and all my congruent sides as well. Now, if we look at this one here, it says a polygon LMNP is congruent to polygon EFYDH. Identify all pairs of corresponding angles and corresponding congruent sides for this side. So I don't even know what shape it is. I already know it's a shape with four angles in it. But even though I don't know what the shapes look like, I can list all my congruent angles and all my congruent sides. And in this case, we're going to have four congruent angles and 4 congruent sides. And so again, the order tells me specifically which one goes with which. So the first one, I know that angle L is going to be congruent to angle E. Second angle, angle M, is going to be congruent to angle F. Third one here, angle N, is going to be congruent to angle G. And the last one, angle P, is going to be congruent to angle H. So those are all my congruent angles, but not for my sides. I'm going to have 4 congruent sides. So the first side, again, is the first 2 letters. Side LM is going to be congruent to side EF. Second one here with the second letter and the third letter, side MN, is going to be congruent to the second and third letter, FG, side FG. The third side is going to be the last 2 letters, NP. Side NP is going to be congruent to side GH. And again, the last one here, oops, let me go ahead and rewrite that again. This is going to be side GH. And the last one, again, is going to be the first letter and the last letter. Side LP is going to be congruent to side EH. Again, even though I don't know how the side looks, how the shapes look, I'm going to assume, let's say we have something like that, then the other one also has to look something like that. And so if I were to label it, I'm going to label this one as L, M, N, P. Then this one will have to be E, F, G, H. And again, if they want me to label it congruent angles and congruent sides, well, I know that angle L is going to be congruent to angle E. Angle M is going to be congruent to angle F. Angle N is going to be congruent to angle G. And angle P, 1, 2, 3, 4, is going to be congruent to angle H, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So those are all my congruent angles and all my sides as well. Side ML is going to be congruent to side EF. Side MN is going to be congruent to side FG. Side NP is going to be congruent to side GH. And lastly, side LP, oops, let me fix that one. Side LP is going to be congruent to side EH. And there you go. So that's how I can label all my congruent angles and all my congruent sides just by simply knowing my congruency statement. So for example, here, sometimes they might be asking you for just one specific type of corresponding angle or corresponding side. So as you can see here, they're giving me my congruency statement. Triangle QRS is congruent to triangle JSK. Sometimes they might give you the triangles, but it's not labeled. But again, we don't even need the triangles because even with the congruency statement, we can already know which ones are going to be equal to which. So as you can see here, they're asking me for side RS. Well, what side of the other triangle is going to be congruent to side RS with the same 2 letters that are on the end, SK. So I already know that side RS is going to be congruent to side SK. And that will be my answer. And the second one here, side WU, well, let's see, WU, well, that one's going to be congruent to what side? Side JU. And that's, again, just by simply knowing my congruency statement, I can already know which sides and what angles are going to be congruent to each other. Same thing with this last one here. Now, this one, they're asking me for angle H. Well, angle H, since it's the third letter here, I know that angle H is going to be congruent to what angle? Angle V. Even though I don't have my triangles labeled, even if I didn't even have the triangles, I can get all of that information just by knowing my congruency statement. Or sometimes they might not give you the congruency statement. They might be asking you to be writing it and they give you the labeled triangles here. But again, same thing here. I can see the first triangle here. The first angle that they're looking at is angle G. So I can say angle G, triangle G, second one is H, and the third one is I. So triangle GHI is going to be congruent to what the order going to be over here. Same thing we follow. The first one is V, since it has only one tick mark. The second one is W, because that one has two tick marks. And the last one is X, because that one has three tick marks. And so again, there's my congruency statement. Triangle GHI is congruent to triangle VWX. And again, this will even tell me the congruent sides. For as you can see here, side GH is congruent to side VW. As you can see, one tick mark, one tick mark. The second side, HI, with two tick marks, is congruent to side WX with two tick marks. And the last one, side GI with three tick marks, is going to be congruent to side VX, which is the one with three tick marks. So as you can see here, let's see for the second example. Again, they want me to state my congruency statement. So again, let's look at this triangle first. So it's going to be triangle. The first angle they're looking at is angle D. The second one is angle V. And the third one is angle X. So triangle DVX is congruent to, and again, in this second triangle, is going to be triangle D again, because that one has one arc mark. The second one is C, and the third one is B. And so there's my congruency statement. Triangle DVX is congruent to triangle DCB. And lastly here, again, we have two different triangles, and they want me to state my congruency statement. So see triangle, let's start with this triangle here. The first letter will be C, the second letter will be B, and the third letter will be D. So triangle CBD is congruent to, and again, for this triangle, the order must be, the first angle has to be B, the second answer has to be, the second letter angle has to be C, and the third letter has to be W. And so that right there is my congruency statement for these pair of triangles, congruent triangles. Triangle CBD is congruent to triangle BCW. But we don't need to know all the parts of the triangles are congruent. All we need is minimum 3. So as you can see here, we've been seeing that all the angles and all the sides have been are congruent, but we don't need to know all the angles and all the sides have to be congruent. All we need to know is minimum 3. And so for that, it says if all corresponding angles and sides of triangles are congruent, then the triangles are congruent. However, you can prove triangles are congruent by using fewer parts. So here we're going to be looking at two different ways we can be proving triangles are congruent with only knowing 3 parts of the information. 3 parts are congruent. So the first one is called SSS, which means side, 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 which means that 3 pairs of, that means that we have 2 triangles with congruent sides. So for example, here we have this one side is congruent to this one side. This other side will be congruent to this other side. And this third side is congruent to this third side here. But again, even though they don't tell us any information about our angles, it's already enough information to know that my 2 triangles are congruent to each other if I know that all 3 sides are congruent. If all 3 sides are congruent, it's enough information to know that the triangles are congruent. The second one here is called SAS, which stands for side, angle, side. And that means that we're going to have two sides that are congruent and an included angle that is congruent. So for this one here, the order is going to be very important because we need to know that 2 sides are congruent and a specific angle. So that would look something like this. That this side is equal to this side, that this angle is equal to this angle, and that this side is equal to this side. So that right there is one specific example, but right now I will go more into depth between explaining to you specifically how SAS works. The first one we're going to be looking here is the side, 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 SSS. And so that means that if 3 sides of one triangle are congruent to 3 sides of another triangle, then the triangles are congruent. That's all I need to know in order for me to say that those 2 triangles are congruent. So for example here, if the first side here, side AB, is congruent to the first side here, side DE. The second side will be side BC is congruent to side EF. And my last side here will be side AC is congruent to side DF. So if I know that all my 3 sides are congruent, then I can already say that triangle ABC is congruent to triangle DEF. I can already say, even though I don't know anything about my angles, if my three sides are congruent, that's enough information for me to know that the two triangles are congruent to each other. So even from here, now I can say that angle A is congruent to angle D, angle B is congruent to angle E, and angle C is congruent to angle F. But again, the side is enough information for me to say that those two triangles are congruent to each other. The second one here is the side angle side. That one says if two sides and the included angle, this is going to be very, very important. The included angle of one triangle is congruent to two sides and the included angle of another triangle, then the two triangles are congruent. Now, the included means that the angle that's between the sides. So again, here we have to know that two sides and an angle are congruent, but the angle has to be between the two congruent sides. So as you can see here, side AB is congruent to side DE, and then they're telling you as well that side BC is congruent to side EF. They don't tell me anything about AC and they don't tell me anything about DF. Since they don't tell me anything about it, I know that those two sides are congruent and the angle B, is congruent to angle E. So it has to be two sides and the included angle for me to know that those two triangles are congruent to each other. So again, if side AB is congruent to side DE, then again, the angle has to be between those two congruent sides. Angle B is congruent to angle E. And lastly, side BC is congruent to side EF. And so again, it has to be two sides and the included angle, the angle that is between those two congruent sides. Then it's enough information for me to say that triangle ABC is congruent to triangle DEF. And so again, in order for me to know use side angle side, SSS, it has to be the two congruent sides and the included angle, the angle in between, in order for me to say that those two triangles are equal to each other. Let's go ahead and try some examples. All right, so here they want me to determine if the triangles are congruent. If they are, state how you know. So again, there's two different ways that I can know. As you can see, they're not giving me a lot of information, they're only giving me a little bit. So the first ones that we have covered so far is SSS and SAS, side angle side. So let's see the first example here. They're telling me here that this side, is congruent to this side. They're also telling me that this side here is congruent to this side over here. And then they're telling me here that this angle is congruent to this angle. So as you can see here, I have side, angle, side, side, angle, side. So since I have the two sides and the included angle that are congruent, I can say that these triangles are congruent by SAS, by side, angle, side. Let's look at the second example here. They're telling me that this side is congruent to this side. Then they're telling me here that this other side is congruent to this side. Now, they don't tell me anything about the middle side, but I can already automatically assume that those two sides are equal to each other, because if I were to separate the two triangles, obviously this side will be congruent, right? Because they're exactly the same. So then I can already say that these two sides as well are equal to each other. So since they're telling me something about all my sides, that all three sides are equal, then these two triangles are congruent by SSS, because they're telling me here that all the sides are congruent to each other. And again, it's all based on the information that they're giving you. You cannot assume, you have to go based on the information that they're giving you. Let's look at this third one here. In the third one here, they're telling you that this side is congruent to this side, because it has the two tick marks. And then they tell you that this other side is congruent to this other side. Now, they don't give me any other more information about there. But if you remember from a couple sections before, what do I know about these two sides, these two angles here? I mean, what are these two angle pairs called? These two angle pairs are called vertical angles. And what do we know about vertical angles? Vertical angles are congruent. So I can already say that these two angles are congruent as well. So as you can see here, I have a side, an angle, and a side. In the second triangle here, I have a side, the included angle, and another side. So that means that these two triangles are congruent by side, angle, side. And again, the order has to be very, very important. Let's look at this fourth one here, the fourth example. In this fourth example, they're telling me that this side is congruent to this side. And then they also tell me that this second side is congruent to this side. Now, do they give me any other information here? There's no way that I can assume that those two angles are congruent. There's no way that I can know anything from the rest of the angles or the other two sides. So since I only know two sides here, that means that we do not have enough information to know if these two triangles are congruent. So for this one will be not enough information. So there's no way for me to know if these two triangles are congruent just by knowing that two sides are equal. Again, I need to know minimum 3 parts, and they have to be specific parts in order for me to say that those two triangles are congruent. So this one, we do not have enough information. Let's look at example number 4 here. I'm sorry, not example number 5. Let me erase all this. All right, so let's look at example number 5. Number 5, they're telling me that this side, the first side here with one tick mark, this side is congruent to this side. The second one here, this side is congruent to this side. And lastly here, they already tell me that this third side is congruent to this third side. So since they tell me that all the sides are congruent, that means I can say that these two triangles are congruent by SSS. Okay, and the last one here, example number 6. Okay, so let's see, they tell me that this side is congruent to this side, so the one with two tick marks, as well as this side here with one tick mark is congruent to this one over here. And again, they don't tell me anything about my angles or anything about my other sides, but I know for this one, I can say that these two angles are congruent because again, what type of angle pair are they? They are vertical angles. So this angle is equal to this angle. So I do know two sides in an angle, but as you can see here, there's going to be side, angle, side. But now, is this angle the included angle? Is this angle the one in between those two? No, right? So even though I do know two sides in one angle, the angle has to be included. It has to be the one between the two sides that I know that are congruent. So since this is not the included angle, this one is not enough information. So not enough information. And so again, why? Because there's two sides in one angle, right? But the angle has to be the included angle. It was on this triangle here, but it wasn't on this triangle here. So that's why we do not have enough information to say that the two triangles are congruent. Thank you so much for watching my video. Make sure you go to complete your assignments on Google Classroom and let me know if you have any questions.